Today's subject is one that I'm not sure I really want to do, but I feel like I have to, and it's just as the matter of completeness, you know. I put together a whole bunch of these MS660s. Nothing like a little brake clean I clean my workbench with. The old 54 millimeter cylinders I got early on were actually pretty good. In the first of this series of the 56 millimeter top ends that I had gotten through Machine Doctor, Hudzel, and those channels with this square base, well, they may have had a little bit of Freeport issues, but they ran good. The last group of 56 millimeter cylinders that I had purchased have a different casting. I think I had mentioned that in my earlier video on the subject. And they didn't look as nice as these. And I have yet to find a source of these. So I took one of the ones that was obviously not the best, and I put it on bling saw. And the intent was basically to both, you know, build bling saw, because that's a cool, fun project, but also to test and see whether or not the ones that were compromised, in my mind, still could actually run. And I know that may sound goofy, but, you know, that's kind of how I roll. I just try things. And, you know, I'm one of those people who believe strongly in the concept of empirical data. So what I wanted to do today is, because this saw concept that I built here, as goofy as it is, I like it. And I want to bring it to a more permanent status in my saw world. What does that mean? I want it to be one of my more commonly used work saws, because I just like running it. It's just goofy enough, but it backs it up with power that I want to make it better. And of course, one of the things that crossed my mind is, why don't I take one of these cylinders? I've got one left. This is the last one I've got. But take this 56 millimeter cylinder that has the wider transfers and all that. You know, I'll do what I did before, and I'll show you what I do, is I sort of touch up the transfers. I'm not going to put a finger port there. I'm not going to do that, a bridge port. I'm just going to kind of leave it stock and just clean it up, but put it on bling saw, and then bling saw is going to work. It's going to be a real serviceable saw, but it's also going to be one that actually gets used. I just had a lot of fun with this. I retired my first 56 millimeter version, and you know, I do what I normally do, is I got it fired up, dump the gas out, and let it idle to the end. And now, to pull the cylinder on this, basically I got to remove the handle, the carburetor, and the muffler to expose, and the cover, to expose that cylinder to the point where you can really get to it. I'm going to babble a little bit, so this is not just about me changing this cylinder, but changing this cylinder gives me a reason to talk about these aftermarket builds. And I have to do this from time to time. The 660s, you know, they're not a bad saw built. And I've said this a whole bunch of times, and it's really worth repeating, is the mindset you have going into these projects determines the success of the results. Trust me on that. And what I mean by that, it's not just a quality issue, it's what you expect. A lot of this stuff is good, but a lot of it's not. Some of the stuff you have to sub out. Very few of these parts are actually as good as the steel OEM parts that they're derived from. And that handle in particular, this one right here, if you're really going to use this saw, I recommend getting a better handle. These are very soft. First time you pinch that saw and yank on it, this is going to bend. You know what I'm saying? I use the HL supply source for an aftermarket handle, just simply because they're less expensive. They're fairly cheap. There are better options than that, I'm sure. It's just that's what I've used. The bling side of this saw, this intake, I don't know, guys. Is that really a legitimate approach? I've cut a lot of wood with it, so if your priority set is where mine is, that's legitimate. I want to have fun with this thing and also do work. Is this a saw that you're going to go out into the woods and make a living with? Well, probably not. You know, we're going to test the theory over time about how reliable this particular saw build is going to be. And one of the reasons I'm going through this change in the cylinders is simply because I want to actually increase the chances of success on this saw being, you know, a legitimate saw for me to do a lot of work with. I don't want to jerk around with the plating coming off and things like that of the junkier cylinders. So I'm going to invest the time, and I think this is kind of the theme. This saw right here, you kind of have a vision in your mind of what you're looking for, and what I'm trying to do is help you get the right frame of mind so you can actually achieve that. And this saw right here, as it is, with the cylinder it is, even in its what I consider junk configuration, is a great get-together saw. But that's not good enough. I want to have enough faith in the build where I can actually take this saw out with maybe a backup saw for a day and not waste a day with a busted saw. I want it to run. That's my muffler mod, by the way. Sounds good. One thing I can say is you know, I often get questions about steel versus Husqvarna, about how easy they are to work on. I really think the question should be generations of saw, which are easy to work on. The homeowner plastic steels are not as easy to work on as, say, the homeowner plastic Husqvarnas. A 455 Husqvarna is a lot easier to work on. Alright, there's my other muffler mod where I basically gutted the interior. I'm going to try to leave that handle on to take the cover off. By the way, to this point in time, the two tools, or the three tools that I've used, is obviously to take off the bar and chain. Everything on that saw is either T27 or T20, so one of these, and a screwdriver because of my goofy intake. And unlike the OEM covers, by the way, I don't have little brass bushings, although I'm tempted to make some on this saw. That will be something that may appear over time for me to, I think, make the plastic a little more stable. You got these three screws that take this cover off, by the way. Pliers. I don't have the hand strength anymore to pull those off. So there's the cover. Okay, another tool. Oh, and another tool. So now we're up to 1, 2, scraper, T27, pliers. Okay. And a clean workbench. And one of the things that I strongly suggest that I'm not going to do, you know, do as I say, not as I've done. Is dump the gas out. Because when I take that fuel line on, it's going to come up and just pee everywhere if the temperature has warmed up. The other option is to just release the pressure before you get started. Pop the fuel line off. I gotta dump the gas. Camera off again. Alright, gas is dumped. Time for the carburetor to come off. Now, to get the carburetor out on these, you gotta get the linkage off. It really isn't that tough when you're young and nimble. But when you've got arthritis in your hands, like I do, it's not as easy as it should be. Another set of tools. Basically what you do is you get in there and snap that throttle to full throttle, unhook it, kind of like that. The carburetor comes out. Alright, while I'm here, I need to take the ring, and sometimes you got to work from the side here to pop these off, and you don't want to bend it, so be gentle. Those two things are really important, because we're going to take that boot and stuff it right back through when we pull the cylinder. So now it's time to yank the cylinder off. And I kept telling people, when I use that 1184 and the 1194 before it, and I give it time to set up, and it takes a while, it's also an adhesive. With the Husqvarna and the paper gasket, it's pretty easy to bust them apart because the gasket splits. But this thing has got those metal gaskets. This thing didn't overtly blow up. For that matter, to a lot of people, they wouldn't even noticed what I noticed. But I noticed it going just a little off. And I'm going, you know something? I have this sneaking suspicion, based on what I had done to this off, I'm going to ruin the gasket because the gasket's glued. It doesn't want to come off. There it goes. Okay, continuing on. So we got the cylinder off. Nothing looks catastrophic, but it's not pretty either. These things here, this is the decomp as comes from the Farmertec. Here's why you want them off your saw. Is that will actually come all the way out the other side. Can you imagine if that sucker dropped down inside, ruined your saw? You know how mad you'd be? You know what I'm saying? So Husqvarna, OEM, Steel OEM, anything but that, or a plug. So that's advice number one. I've known that for a while, but like I said, this experiment here was about using the parts, and some of them I knew were not quite the best to build my bling saw, just to see how they would work in a more stressed environment. The cylinder, this one had a known issue for me. Some of these have got bad plating. The plating actually isn't even complete. This was one of those, and also this one had a gouge in it. This cylinder was wearing really quickly, so I don't think this would last as long as the one on my other saw. I don't think it'd last that long at all, to be honest with you. Let me see if I can get a flashlight so we can look inside. You know, maybe it would last. Maybe okay. I retract that. I mean, it's not pretty, but not pretty, but it wasn't failing either. I guess I can't honestly say that it's failed catastrophically. It did not fail, but it sure is ugly. How's that? See how it polished off right there? Polished it right in there. So it was abrading on that piston pretty hard. I want to point out that there's a difference between porting and cleaning up a cylinder. I cleaned this one up a little bit, and really what I did was I focused on the top edges of these where I just broke the flashing more than anything else. And that intake was pretty asymmetric. I probably could do a little more on that, bring that up a little bit. I might just do it yet. But the top edge was really sharp, so I wanted to make sure, if you look at all these, the focus was just making a chamfer so that when the ring goes down, comes back up, it doesn't have a sharp edge to to snag. Now I opened up the intake. I just kind of roughed it out a little bit because it was pretty small as compared to the other one. For those guys who are going to actually make it a performance saw, on these dual transfer port things, you really can't do much to the timing on this one here. You really can't. And the reason is this: there's a little bit of free port. You put the, see how that is? Now it won't be quite that much. It'll be about like that. So if I drop the cylinder, since the floor of that exhaust is so low, I've really made that a problem with the short skirt pistons. The second thing is these pistons in of themselves are shorter than the standard 54 millimeter. So that effectively is increasing the intake timing right there. So you really don't have to do much. But the port itself was sort of asymmetric. It was kind of goofy. So I kind of cleaned it up a little bit. Same with, I cleaned up the flashings on the bottom of the transfers. And this was rough. This is, you know, what? I probably put 15 minutes into it. But here's a couple of things you got to consider when you do even cleaning them up. You see this, the skirt of the piston? You don't want to go so wide with that intake that you actually go past that skirt. For that matter, you want about 30 or 40 thousandths there, so it can still seal. Okay, that's one thing you want. And also on the exhaust side, I can't show it here, but as the exhaust port comes, it doesn't take much rotation to free port like crazy there too. So you really can't widen that exhaust. So you think about these, you really can't drop the cylinder to increase compression, so that kind of stinks. You really can't widen the exhaust, or it'll be a free port heaven. And the other thing is the thickness of the casting around the transfers really don't let you hog it out either. So the big bores, other than cleaning them up, you know, the average guy with a Dremel tool, about the only thing he can do is what I've done right here. And that's why I'm doing it. That's why I'm leaving it at this stage. I think this falls into one of the theoretical ones. I'm leaving just enough where I can grab onto it. But this one here I cut back pretty severely. And I'm going to put this one in the piston first. And then I'll put the one with the tab on it second. I'm going to use this piston here. And arrow goes to the front. I think I'm going to want to work from that side, so I'm going to put this ring in first. Alright, so you can see it's in there. I use the wrist pin to help push it in the back side. And I want the opening to the bottom, which I have. It's in there. So now I can put this piston on. So it's time to put the gasket on, start putting things together. Dish side to the case, that's theory. Of course, I'm going to put a little 1194 and everything. That's what I do. You know, it's just little details. Is it necessary? I don't know. Probably not. I would call this OCD. Something I do to make myself feel better about the build, and knowing intellectually it probably has absolutely no difference whatsoever, I do it anyway. Put a little more in the bottom of this thing here. But part of the reason I go to that extra step on like these big bores, and see how thin that casting is right there? That is not a lot of, you know, that's not a lot of surface to seal with, you know. So anything I can do to stack the odds in my favor, I'm going to do that. I've already got that clip in there. I like to put a little oil on things. Doesn't matter. Again, it might be one of those things that I do to make myself feel better about the situation. Get a little oil in there too first. So now I know there's oil on that wrist pin. Arrow to the front. There it is. Get the other wrist pin clip in there. And then we'll go about putting the top end on. It's in there. Okay, piston is on. Gasket material is on. Rings come next. And you have those locating pins either side of that piston. And you have to work to those, obviously. Rebate on those rings to the top. And get a little oil on things. Just to sort of help things get started. Ring compressor. There it is. Yeah. Couple things. Before I go any further, and I probably should have done this before, is I need to put an intake boot on that, and I need to get the screws in there. So I'm not going to use this intake because it's glued on. Get some 1184 on that. This one here, there's a little marker, and that tends to go to the parting line of the casting. Okay, it's ready. Okay, get these cylinder screws in next before you go down with that cylinder. Put your manifold in before you even think about putting that cylinder down. And you're going to have to push it through before that cylinder will seat. Okay. So I got the cylinder down, and I've got the intake boot through the plastic. One of the things that I do is I get the screws started. Just get them started. And that's get that piston all the way down at bottom dead center. Make sure it clears that gasket. Okay? And once it does that, that's when you tighten up on these cylinders. I'm going to do it a little at a time first to make sure I don't have an interference issue with that gasket. I've had a couple of them where there have been interference issues. So there I am. It's down there, and I don't have a clearance issue. So I'm just going to tighten it up. Don't use these. I'm telling you. Wouldn't you be upset if that ended up in your motor? This cylinder here, guys, there's no free port. Why did they stop bringing these cylinders in? These ones are awesome. You know, usually there's a reflective, I don't bother. You know, if I start milling with it or something like that, maybe. This one here is a fiber one. It has like a metallic fiber to it. I think that's better than what came, so that's why I'm going to put this one on. I don't see any sense of 1184 on that, though. I really don't. The other thing I never understood is how come they don't put a heat shield in these? You know something? There's a little ground to till on that. I think I'm going to open up that muffler just a little bit on the top side. I think there's a little ground to till there. Okay, I raised the top of that exhaust just a little bit with a die grinder. That made a nice little difference. So now there's a fairly smooth transition from the, I don't know if you can see that. Now that I got it pushed up Now I'm going to tighten that down. What do you think? So I raised the top of the muffler, beveled it a little bit, and then with my finger I pushed the gasket up a little bit so that it was hanging down about 25 thousandths or so. This is another one where you don't want to go too tight, just simply because those screws aren't that big. So I'm going to get it firm where I'm not stripping it, and then we're going to run it a little bit and then come back and tighten them up more. You can see what I did there. One thing I can tell you is Bling Saw as a saw is quite a bit more saw than that one over there, the one that has the highway top end. Really not in the same league. I realized I had run out of batteries as I was putting this thing together, so I'm not sure where it quit. The saw went back together. The 56 millimeter top end that I put on this Bling Saw here is one I had purchased a year and a half, 2 years ago, and they don't seem to be available anymore, and I'm very upset about it, but they're not. So my two 56 millimeter saws that you see on the videos, they have that older style top end, not the ones that you'd get now if you ordered. I want to make that absolutely clear, and I really don't care who it pisses off. Because ultimately, you guys who watch this videos are the ones that count to me. I wish I could find a source of those top ends through Farmertec or who else, or someone else. But that 56, I don't know if the video shut off, but when I started looking at it, the quality of the bore was pretty nice. It did not have any free porting, so that the level of the exhaust port, the floor of the exhaust port was a little higher. Now, I don't know if the video was running, but I did clean up the ports a little bit. I did not do a port job. I just broke chamfers and, you know, made things symmetric. So I really didn't change the design at all. Now, look at this mess of tools. This is the stuff that I actually pulled out of the drawer to do this. A dribble tool with a cutoff wheel to do those little wrist pin clips. You know, I cut one off. I hope that showed. Is that necessary? You know, maybe not. Again, the premise is this time Bling Saw is going together for me as a work saw. I don't want to take it apart. When I first built it with that other top end, Farmertec top end, it was literally just, well, I just wanted to see if that stuff would work, even though I knew that it was somewhat compromised. Dremel tool, cutoff tool, pliers to take off the spark plug, air chuck, gotta have a T27, screwdrivers. I use these to put the wrist pin clips in. Bar and chain, 8 millimeter for the carburetor screws. Clean things up. Ring compressor, 1184. That's a lot of junk, you know? And I didn't use the gasket that came out. I used a fibrous one that had like a steel mesh. Here's the piston that came out of that other Farmertec. It was, in my mind, showing accelerated wear, especially right in there. I don't know if you see that. And that was because of that really rough bore on that cylinder, in my mind. By the way, this one here has a modified OEM chain adjuster. It does not have the one that came with the Farmertec. And you can look at my Bling Saw build video to see what I did there. Okay. I think the only thing this Bling Saw needs is its air filter. You know, I thought I'd find this arrangement when I first put it together, and if you saw my video, you probably realize that I saw it as something that bordered on ridiculous. You know something? I still do. But I'm hoping this cylinder is one that I can leave on for a couple of years. That would be the definition of win for me. I think it's ready to try.